Bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everybody. So first and foremost, I would like to start by offering my condolences to the family of Tiferet Lapido. I met with her father in Tel Aviv and with her uncle. They told me how much she was a brilliant, beautiful young woman. And my heart and my thoughts are with her loved ones. J'aimerais commencer par offrir mes condoléances à la famille de Tiferet Lapido. J'ai rencontré son père et son oncle lorsque j'étais à Tel Aviv. Ils m'ont parlé à quel point c'était une jeune femme brillante, magnifique, et j'offre mes condoléances à sa famille et à ses proches. We're now at 6 confirmed deaths and 2 missing Canadians. Now, talking about evacuations, at this point, Flight 11 and 12 are leaving Tel Aviv today. We've evacuated 1,300 people at this point. We also were able to evacuate, and one of the first countries in the world to evacuate our nationals, Canadians, out of the West Bank. 21 Canadians were evacuated yesterday. We were also able to evacuate Australians and New Zealanders. When it comes to Gaza, we are in contact with many of our like-minded partners. I was in contact with the G7 this morning, and so this is, of course, a priority. My message to Canadians that are in Tel Aviv and Canadians that are in West Bank, if you want to leave, please contact Global Affairs Canada. If you're given a spot, please take it, because we don't know how long this operation will be able to continue as the situation is very volatile. If you are in Lebanon, it is now time to leave while commercial flights are available. When it comes to humanitarian aid in Gaza, I was in contact yesterday with many of my counterparts. I was in contact with the Prime Minister of Lebanon, with the Foreign Minister of Egypt again. I've been in contact with my Jordanian counterpart. Later today, I'll be talking to my counterpart from Turkey, and I've been in contact with many of my G7 counterparts, including also with the State Department and the White House. We are working 24/7 on this. Our goal is to make sure that we can help de-escalate the situation, and this is my utmost priority. Just before a second. Je vais juste le dire en français, Ramon, comme ça. OK. So, en français. Premièrement, les vols 11e et 12e vols en partance de Tel Aviv sont cédulés aujourd'hui. À ce stade-ci, il y a 1300 personnes qui ont été évacuées à partir de Tel Aviv. Nous avons été en mesure aussi d'évacuer 21 Canadiens à partir de la Cisjordanie hier. Nous étions un des premiers pays au monde à être en mesure de le faire. Maintenant, les opérations se continuent et hier, nous avons évacué 21 Canadiens, mais nous avons également été capables d'évacuer des Australiens et des Néo-Zélandais. Lorsque vient la question de Gaza et l'évacuation de Canadiens à Gaza, c'est une priorité. Je suis en contact avec plusieurs pays, notamment l'Égypte, notamment le Liban, notamment la Jordanie, plusieurs joueurs de la région, mais aussi j'ai été en contact avec le G7 plus tôt aujourd'hui. C'est certainement une priorité. Maintenant, lorsque vient la question de si vous êtes à Tel Aviv, donc si vous êtes en Israël, si vous êtes aussi en Cisjordanie et que vous voulez quitter, s'il vous plaît, inscrivez-vous auprès d'Affaires mondiales Canada. Maintenant, si vous vous êtes donné un siège, s'il vous plaît, prenez-le. Parce qu'on ne sait pas combien de temps on va être capable de continuer l'opération. Si vous êtes au Liban, c'est le temps de quitter. Et parce que présentement, il y a des moyens, des vols commerciaux encore disponibles, c'est important de prendre dans le fond, si vous êtes au Liban, c'est le temps de quitter. Il y a encore des vols commerciaux disponibles. Alors, s'il vous plaît, prenez-les. Lorsque vient la question aussi de la région, de façon générale, notre objectif est certainement d'être engagée à tous les niveaux. J'ai été en contact avec mes homologues du G7, j'ai été en contact avec le premier ministre libanais. Hier, j'ai été en contact avec mon homologue égyptien. J'ai parlé également avec mon homologue jordanien. Et puis, je parlerai plus tard aujourd'hui à mon homologue de la Turquie. Bref, vous pouvez voir que notre objectif est d'être très impliqué pour faire en sorte qu'on prévienne un conflit qui pourrait s'étendre à toute la région.
La riposte d'Israël, selon vous.
Okay, just a second. I'll start with English. I'll go then to French.
What's the line for Canada between protecting civilians and Israel's right to defend itself with Hamas embedding itself in civilian targets?
Well, so you've heard me on this. First and foremost, we condemn the terrorist attacks by Hamas. And we support Israel's right to defend itself according to international humanitarian law. And we are concerned, not only concerned, but I know Canadians are concerned, I share their concern, of what's going on in Gaza. I've said it many times, Gaza is one of the worst places to live on earth right now. And so that's why we're really working extremely hard to make sure that there is a humanitarian corridor towards Gaza. And also, we called earlier today different G7 partners to increase their funding to the UN, as we just did, because we need to make sure that humanitarian aid is available first, and second, also given to people.
Is there a chance to get foreign nationals out? Do you have any information on injuries or deaths of Canadians in Gaza? What is the situation there? We understand there have been Canadians who have been trying to leave and who are facing bombings. What are you saying?
The information I have regarding deaths and regarding missing people is the one I provided you beforehand. Now, the information we are getting within Gaza sometimes can be limited. Our mission for the Palestinian Authority is in Ramallah in the West Bank, not in Gaza. There are many diplomats that are in Gaza, but mainly a lot of them are from the UN. That is why I met with the head of the UN in charge of humanitarian aid in Gaza while I was in Amman. Meanwhile, what I can tell you is that the number of Canadians that have reached out to Global Affairs Canada to be helped is around 200. But this number is growing. That being said, we're not the only country having nationals in Gaza. The U.S. has, many European countries, we do, and we're working with them.
Can you clarify your position? Is what's happening in Gaza, according to your view, a violation of international humanitarian law?
Well, of course, a civilian is a civilian. And therefore, we believe that Israeli civilians and Palestinian civilians are equal. And they need to have access to food, to water, and to fuel.
Without a ceasefire, is it a violation of humanitarian law?
That is why we're very, very engaged in providing that humanitarian access. And we need to make sure that we're in contact with Israeli officials to make sure that international law principles are upheld in this situation.
Vous avez dit en anglais que la situation à Gaza est un des endroits les pires au monde.
Oui.
Alors, pourquoi cette pudeur à dire, à demander publiquement à Israël d'ouvrir un corridor? Pourquoi cette pudeur à ne pas condamner Israël ouvertement? Vous ne le faites jamais.
C'est faux.
Je vous ai jamais entendu dire à Israël.
Je vous dis qu'on en appelle à un corridor humanitaire. Je vous dis qu'on est engagé avec plusieurs pays pour faire en sorte que ce soit le cas. Et donc, on en appelle à Israël, à l'Égypte, aux États-Unis, au G7, à la Jordanie, à tous les pays impliqués dans cette crise majeure, la plus importante attaque terroriste des 50 dernières années en Israël, à faire en sorte que les civils soient protégés. Nous avons été un des premiers pays à prendre de l'Occident à faire en sorte que ça soit le cas. Et nous allons travailler nuit et jour pour protéger des civils, mais aussi protéger les civils.
official, how has the rise in Islamophobia and such affected you personally?
Well, there has been increasing incidents of a rise of both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and I think it is concerning for us as public representatives to see that. What's really important to note is that we now have in place a new special envoy to promote Holocaust remembrance and fight anti-Semitism, and she's working very closely with the special representative to combat Islamophobia, which we appointed as a government, and it's really good to see those two leaders working together at this difficult time.
You mentioned that there are some problems with both communities, but last week the
Not problems with both
I'm sorry, I
communities,
was
but
looking for my English
yeah,
words. I know you didn't say
there's
that.
been incidents of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism.
My question was, the RCMP and Minister Leblanc last week issued a statement in which they only talked about Jewish community organizations. Is that to which they have to increase security? And I'm wondering, is that a problem? Should we not protect both institutions from both communities?
I spoke to Minister LeBlanc yesterday, in fact, right about this, and I've been making phone calls with leaders in both communities, and they're very, very happy with the way law enforcement has stepped up to protect places of worship, to protect community centers. And so they've been actually very much reassured.
In both communities.
In both communities.
But
I've
why
been talking
the
to them
statement
throughout the weekend.
Did not mention that, only the Jewish
It does. The statement does not reflect what actually happened on the ground, and I spoke to Minister LeBlanc specifically about this. I think it's important to sympathize with what people are going through. There's people who have had their family members killed. There's people who have had their family members kidnapped by Hamas. There's Palestinian Canadians who have family members in Gaza who are really worried about what will happen to their relatives and their family members. So there's a lot of anxiety all over in different communities. What we have to do is continue to reassure people, work very hard to get Canadians back from Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank, and make sure that we are doing everything that we can to ensure the release of Canadians and everyone who's been kidnapped.
What is this potential? Yeah, I'll let Catherine take that.
What is the latest on the possibility of humanitarian corridor, and if you could talk about how President Biden's visit might impact that?
There's reports, initial unconfirmed reports, that his visit is actually connected to an opening of one corridor into Gaza. There's also a report that the EU has secured an air corridor through Egypt. Canada has been working very hard on this. I've been in contact with all my counterparts in the region, ministers, as well as international trusted organizations and Canadian civil service organizations who are there, who are on the ground, and they're pre-positioned supplies. They're appreciative of the initial $10 million announcement we made, and the key is now to get that access, and we've been calling for that access. It's in line with international humanitarian law, and we'll continue to push for that access, but there's really good early progress signs, and we hope that leads to real access on the ground.
Is there how tenuous it is, sir? Because we are hearing from some groups that we are talking about less than 24 hours left to deal with necessities. What are you being told?
Absolutely. We're hearing reports of children drinking dirty water out of desperation. We know that there's tens of thousands of pregnant women in Gaza. We know that there's civilians who need assistance on both sides. And I spoke to the Magen David Adom yesterday, which is the Israeli counterpart to the ICRC, and they've told me about the needs for volunteers, for blood, for equipment. They've exhausted all their supplies. On the Palestinian side, I spoke to the Palestinian Red Cross and Red Crescent Society, and they're also in desperate need of medical supplies and water and food. And that's why the access is really important. We provided the aid. The international trusted organizations are on the ground. They have the supplies pre-positioned in the region. We need to get in. I just spoke to my Egyptian counterpart, and she told me that there's some trucks that have gotten in from Egypt, but it's not enough, and we need to do more.
Is there hope that if humanitarian aid is going in, foreign nationals may be able to come out of the Gaza Strip?
Yes. Once you have a corridor, then there is a very high likelihood of foreign nationals having a way out of that dangerous conflict.
What's your understanding of where the blockage is? What is holding it up exactly? Where is the roadblock in making this happen?
I think the message that I got from the international aid organizations is that they can only operate in an environment of trust, and they have to make sure that for them to go into Gaza, not only to bring in supplies, but to actually help people with medical needs and so on. They have to be 100% sure that their workers will be protected from the conflict, and they're really trying to get that sorted out before they can go in.
So what's the reaction of Israel? What's the feedback you're getting from Israel in terms of establishing that
Well,
corridor?
Minister Joly can speak a little bit more to that because she's the one who went to Israel to push for that access. She also went to Jordan and spoke to the Palestinian Authority. She spoke to the Egyptian government, so have I. And our job is to continue to insist on the adherence to international humanitarian law by all the parties in the conflict. That's a long-standing Canadian position, and we'll continue
But
to
my
do
question
that.
was, what is Israel saying about the request for a corridor?
We make, in every conflict, we have to make sure that international humanitarian law is respected. That includes unimpeded access to humanitarian.
Do you think that's
corridors.
happening?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Don't ask stuff.
It's a theoretical right now. I think the focus is on getting Canadians out there and getting them safe. Obviously, we want a humanitarian corridor, but this is a very fluid situation, and we'll tackle it as it develops.
Has there been any consideration of that at all, or is that just not?
I mean, we're highly concerned about the humanitarian situation. People are dying. It's something that should concern all Canadians. But right now, we're focusing on getting Canadians out.
The Yazidi community is upset that
Just what I'm hearing from them. They saw in September, it wasn't what they wanted. They're expecting a new version soon. Is that correct?
I think what's happening is we're having internal conversations about what is and what isn't possible, and that's about as much as I could share at this time.
What's your reaction that the government repatriated a woman from northeastern Syria who's Canadian in April, and she was married to one of the most infamous ISIS fighters who's serving multiple life sentences in the U.S. for his part in the death of American hostages. She's here on a peaceful one. There have not been charges. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm not aware of the case at all, so it'd be this is the first time hearing about it. So I would have to look at the case and get back to you.
Just to get back on pharmacare, are you at all contacting Quebec, for instance, of what they think about your ambitions in that regards? Because the NDP wants something completely public. In Quebec, it's both public and private.
That's correct. And no, we did have a good conversation, Minister Dubé and I, and all health ministers, just informally around their thoughts on how we deal with the challenges with the cost of pharmaceuticals and the possibility of pharmacare legislation. It's our intention, once we have a better sense of what's happening here in Parliament, that we can have a more detailed conversation with provinces as well. Right now, we're still trying to figure out ourselves among parliamentarians what direction might be able to take.
You mean the NDP?
Well, with the NDP, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, but it's not just the NDP caucus. We're also having conversations with our own caucus, and certainly I've been hearing from Bloc and Conservative members, and I'm not unmoved by their submissions.
Would it be fair to say that while you're drafting your bill, you haven't had so much conversation with provinces in order to draft that bill? Would that be fair?
I think that's fair to say. I think that I have had conversations, as I said, with all of my counterparts. We had what I would categorize as a brief opportunity to discuss the issue in Charlottetown. But part of that is, and rightfully, they want details to know exactly what we're thinking, and we're just not in a position to be able to share that right now because that still is undetermined. So once we have a clearer idea of what might be possible, then I think engagement with my provincial counterparts would be certainly appropriate.
Do you take the red line that Don Davies is talking about? If it's not public health care, they're out of the deal. Do you take that threat seriously?
I don't. Look, honestly, I can't think that way. I can't. We're talking about how we address very real and serious challenges for Canadians and the cost of their medication and the future of pharmacare in this country. We have to make the decision based on reason and logic. What's the best thing for our health system and what is possible in terms of the constraints that we have fiscally. So, people can make ultimatums and draw lines and do all of those kinds of things, but you can't lead from that place. You have to lead from a place of what's right to do. And so, it could very well be that that's the case for them. But I don't, my conversation, and Don Davies and I were both critics of public safety. I have an enormous amount of regard for Don. I think he's a preeminently reasonable fellow. So, the conversations we've had have been very constructive, and they certainly haven't been punched with ultimatums and threats. You know, and I just don't think that's necessary. I really believe the place he's coming from is improvement of the health system. It's the same place I'm coming from. It's the same place both of our caucuses are coming from. And so I think we can have a fruitful conversation on that basis.
Croyez-vous que d'avoir le programme que le NPD vous demande s'impliquerait nécessairement des hausses de taxes ou d'impôts?
Oui, c'est maintenant, c'est impossible de dire que ceci c'est la conséquence d'un système parce que n'était pas un système actuel. Maintenant, on doit chercher pour une attente avec notre parti et l'NPD pour le système des médicaments.
Croyez-vous que c'est ça la conséquence?
Oui, mais c'est difficile de dire qu'est-ce que c'est la conséquence quand je ne suis pas certain qu'est-ce que c'est le système. Alors ça, c'est le problème maintenant. Okay. Merci beaucoup.
I just want to make sure I'm not reading between the lines of what you're saying, but do you believe that what Don Davies has said publicly, that this is a red line for them, that they will pull out of the deal? Or because you're not hearing that behind the scenes, you don't believe it?
No, it's not a question of believing it or not believing it. It's just I'm not motivated by it. I think that the answer here has to be what's in the best interest of the health system. And once we determine that, then we can talk about, you know, whether or not we can continue to work together. But what I'm saying right now is the conversations I'm having with Don Davies are around the improvement of the health system and how do we tackle an incredibly complicated issue in pharmacare. I mean, we're not just dealing with the federal government here. We're dealing with provinces, territories, a myriad of private healthcare providers in this space. So, you know, it's going to be very difficult to navigate. And so I understand, you know, there's party conventions and people have opinions, but that's, you know, when we're negotiating, it has to come from a place of what's in the best interest of health. Don, I think, is a preeminently reasonable fellow. The conversations that we have been centered from that place. And so I think once we determine whether or not we have a path forward or we don't, then we can think about consequences, but we can't lead from that place.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Comment ça se profile avec le Québec, compte tenu qu'ils ont, eux autres, une assurance publique-privée, puis que c'est pas ça que l'NPD veut?
Bien, il va y avoir des discussions, c'est certain. La première chose pour nous, c'est d'arriver avec un accord avec le NPD. Il y a une volonté commune de part et d'autre, mais il faut aussi comprendre qu'il y a une capacité de payer, donc il faut tenir compte de ça aussi.
Mais les relations avec Québec, est-ce que vous en avez parlé avec eux? Puis c'est quoi la réception à date?
Bien, c'est pas moi qui négocie, c'est le ministre de la Santé, mais de ce que je comprends, il y a des négociations ou des discussions avec l'ensemble des provinces. Il peut y avoir des différends.
Mais vous êtes lieutenant du Québec, là, vous devez avoir entendre c'est quoi les
Le lieutenant du Québec négocie pas sur tous les points, c'est le ministre de la Santé qui négocie.
Qu'est-ce que vous pensez de l'initiative de la CAQ concernant le post-secondaire, les universités?
Écoutez, Québec fait ses propres décisions. Je pense pas nécessairement que ce soit la meilleure décision. Pour moi, les universités, c'est comme une fenêtre sur le monde. Là, j'ai l'impression qu'on ferme un peu nos fenêtres.
On s'engage sur l'élogement de l'entente qui a eu lieu avec le Québec.
Oui.
On l'a appris la semaine dernière. Pouvez-vous garantir qu'il n'y a pas de conditions dans cette entente-là?
Bien, il y a des objectifs communs, vous aurez les détails sous peu parce que c'est évidemment une entente de principe, mais dans le cas de Québec, Québec s'engage à doubler les fonds, donc on parle plus de 900 millions et de 1,8 milliard, ce qui est un cas unique dans le Canada, donc 2 fois plus d'argent, ce qui est une bonne Well, this is, of course, a Quebec decision. I don't think it's the best decision, because for me, like universities, like windows that you open to the world, and in this case, I think we're closing those windows.
L'augmentation des frais de scolarité prévue par le gouvernement de François Legault, qu'est-ce que vous pensez?
Bien, écoutez, moi, je pense que les universités anglophones font partie de l'écosystème. C'est important pour attirer des talents chez nous. Vous savez, une des choses, quand on a attiré les grandes entreprises, vous avez vu dans l'industrie des batteries, entre autres, dans l'industrie automobile, c'est la première chose que les gens me demandent, c'est les talents. Alors moi, je pense qu'on se distingue chez nous au niveau de l'éducation, non seulement chez nous au Québec, mais international. Alors moi, il faut se donner toutes les chances pour être sûr de continuer d'attirer des étudiants chez nous.
Donc, bonne ou mauvaise idée?
Écoutez, je pense qu'il y a des choses à repenser pour être sûr qu'on continue d'être ce terreau de talent qu'on a besoin d'être, parce que si on parle de développer des nouvelles industries, ça passe évidemment par les talents. Puis moi, je pense que, vous savez, Concordia, Bishop, McGill font l'envie du monde. Alors, il faut s'assurer qu'on ait les mécanismes en place pour continuer d'attirer des talents chez nous si on veut développer notre
Cette notion que c'est pour combattre l'anglicisation, qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Écoutez, je suis sûr qu'il y a différentes façons de faire. Moi, je respecte beaucoup ce que Québec fait, mais si vous me demandez dans mon esprit ce qui me vient en tête, moi, c'est toute la question des talents. Aujourd'hui, ce qui est le plus ce qui est le plus difficile, j'allais dire, à attirer dans le monde, c'est les talents. C'est ce qui fait qu'on est capable de bâtir l'économie de demain. Alors, moi, je le regarde vraiment sous un angle industriel, économique, mais aussi sous un angle d'un Québécois qui dit il y a toutes sortes de façons, évidemment, de promouvoir le français. C'est une préoccupation qu'on doit tous avoir, mais en même temps, assurons-nous de le faire tout en préservant l'attrait des institutions qu'on a chez nous, universitaires, qui font l'envie du monde.
Monsieur Champagne, au sujet de l'inflation, on apprend ce matin là, les prix de l'épicerie, entre autres, 5,9 en septembre. Êtes-vous satisfait de ça?
Ben non. Ben écoutez, il y a encore beaucoup de travail à faire, c'est clair. On est dans les débuts. On va continuer de travailler pour stabiliser les prix. Vous savez, c'est le début maintenant, donc il y a encore beaucoup de travail à faire. Merci tout le monde. We still have a lot of work to do. We're in the early days of all the work we need to do. Like I always say, the best way to have a more competitive environment in Canada is to have more competition. We have 3 grocers that represent about, 60% of the market. I've been talking to some international partners, and it's clear that in the mid to long term, the best way to bring more stability in prices is to have more competition. So that's what we're going to be pushing. And like I said, I'll be watching that at every step of the way to make sure that we continue to put pressure on the grocers and on the industry to provide stability in prices.
The NDP is calling for a ceasefire in the Middle East. Grocery chains merge, not introducing new ones. How do we impact that?
Well, that's why I've been also talking to some international grocers to see whether they would consider Canada as an attractive market, because I'll do everything that I can to make sure that I bring more competition. And we presented a plan which has 5 steps in it, and we're going to continue pushing. But for me, if you ask me, the best way to bring competition, to bring stability in the process, is more competition. That's why it's so fundamental that the opposition vote with us on C-56. If they want to do something for Canada, for Canadians, and for more competition in the country, we have a tool. We need more tools in the toolbox, and I think Canadians understand that. So we're going to be pushing for that.
The decision, whether it messes with your ability to impose the oil and gas cap and follow through on the electricity regulations.
Well, I think the ruling of the court was quite clear. The federal government continues to have a strong role to play in areas that relate to federal jurisdiction. I think the greenhouse gas decision by the court a few months ago, or a couple of years ago, indicated that very strongly we do have a role to play. So I don't see the ruling as being a problem for the government moving forward. Obviously, we want to work with the provinces and the territories to ensure that we're actually doing these things in as a collaborative a way as we can. But at the end of the day, the federal government has a responsibility to protect the environment.
What do you make of Premier Smith in Alberta is saying quite strongly that her read of this is that you guys don't have that authority?
I said this in the aftermath of it. I used to be a constitutional negotiator. I'm reasonably familiar with the Constitution. I think her interpretation, I would not agree with her interpretation. At the end of the day, the provincial government has areas of responsibility under the Constitution. So does the federal government.
This was a reference. So what's the consequence right now on the current law? Is it still in place until you change it?
It was an opinion, and so the current law stays in place. That being said, it's important that the federal government takes account of what the Supreme Court said, and that we move expeditiously to address the concerns that they raised. And my expectation is we will do just that.
Where are we going to find out more about the modified Atlantic Loop and what exactly that consists of?
Well, we talked about it quite a bit last night. Yeah. Premier Higgs and Premier Hussen were here, and we talked a little bit about it in the joint statement.
Well, that sounds very Onslow. What else?
So there are 2 phases. The first phase is how do we actually work with Nova Scotia and New Brunswick to get off coal by 2030. And I think there was a statement of intent yesterday that we were going to work together to do that. And the federal government has a number of tools to help support the provinces with the work that they need to do. The one transmission line will be part of that. That was part of the Atlantic Loop. The second phase will look at how do we actually ensure compliance with the clean electricity regulation and building out of a broader grid that's going to be necessary. And that will include discussions around additional regional infrastructure. But I would say that things have changed quite a bit since the Atlantic Loop was proposed by actually Premier McNeil in Nova Scotia. The views of the provinces have changed. The availability of capacity, generation capacity in Quebec has changed. The ability to get the loop done by 2030 has changed, and so we need to take account of all of those things. But my expectation is that in Phase 2 there will be a necessity for additional regional infrastructure. It may look a little bit different. It may actually look at exporting intermittent power from wind from Nova Scotia to Quebec rather than the other way around. But I do believe that there will be more in the way of regional infrastructure. Thank you.
Line here before they yell at me. I just wanted to ask you yesterday, Mr. Kruger chaired a committee. You had some concerns in August about the comments he made to shareholders. Did he say anything yesterday that made you feel more confident about Suncor's commitment to climate action?
No, not at all.
What did you think of his appearance in general?
I think, if anything, he's doubling down on the fact that a large oil company like his should ignore an issue like climate change, and to me that's unacceptable.
What did you think about the fact that he hadn't read the clean fuel regulations himself in detail? What does that say to you?
I mean, it shows that he has a lack of interest in what is one of our time's defining issue around the globe. And I think it reinforces the fact that we as a federal government, we need to make sure that the oil and gas sector does its fair share when it comes to fighting climate change.
So that's my next question. When are we going to see the oil and gas cap? It's been promised for a while now.
As I've said, we will see this fall. The Prime Minister reiterated this in New York a couple of weeks ago at the UN Secretary General Summit. It's coming.
What's the holdup?
There's no holdup. I mean, as far as I know, we're the only country in the world that are doing that, and we're the 4th largest oil and gas producer. So it's a pretty bold piece of regulation, and we want to make sure that we get it as right as possible.
Does the Impact Assessment Act decision by the Supreme Court last week, or opinion, I guess, does that have any impact on what this oil and gas cap is going to look like?
I mean, obviously, we're looking very carefully at what the Supreme Court did, but people shouldn't forget that there was another Supreme Court decision, which was not an opinion, last year on carbon pricing, which made it very clear that the federal government can act when it comes to climate change, and we can put a price on pollution, and that as a federal government we have jurisdiction to fight climate change.
This summer there were plastic regulations that went for public consultation in terms of eventually banning plastic packaging for food. Food producers are saying that in the current timeline that's actually going to lead to higher food prices and more food spoilage. So where is that process at right now?
Let me correct this. What we launched last summer is a consultation with the large grocery chains in Canada, and it's not a regulation. We're asking them to come back to us with ideas on how we can work with them to reduce overpackaging using plastic. We hear it from Canadians from coast to coast to coast that they hate seeing so much plastic wrapping. So we ask grocery chains, come back to us and let's work together on solutions to reduce this.
Food producers who are saying that by 2026 having 75% reduction, in 2028 having 95% reduction of plastic packaging on food will make packaging that food more expensive and perhaps increase food spoilage. That's not from the grocery chains, that's from food producers. Some of them are small and independent food producers.
Again, as I said, we're not, for food packaging, we're not working on regulations right now. It's a consultation with the large chains, and we're trying to find solutions with them on how we can reduce plastic packaging.
Where is that consultation process at? Because I was led to believe it was over. So is there still more consultation to go?
I don't have the dates, but we can provide those to you.
Okay. More details?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sortent maintenant et vous demandent de regarder les propositions de Google. Par exemple, l'idée de ce fonds-là. Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord d'aller avec un fonds, de changer de format, de formule, puis d'y aller avec un fonds?
Bien, on regarde présentement les commentaires qui nous ont été fournis tant par les plateformes que par les médias. Évidemment, on va analyser ça avec tout le jugement et le sérieux nécessaire, là, parce que tout le monde comprend qu'on est dans une situation où il y a plus de 500 médias qui ont fermé à travers le Canada au cours de la dernière décennie. Ça, c'est des milliers de journalistes qui ont perdu leur travail. Le but ultime, évidemment, c'est de faire en sorte qu'on amène plus d'argent dans le système pour soutenir les salles de nouvelles à travers le Canada. Canada. Et donc, mon intention, c'est de continuer d'avancer avec ces 18, mais trouver la voie de passage.
Donc, vous fermez pas la porte. Fermez pas la porte à ce que ce soit un fonds comme Google propose.
On regarde les commentaires qui nous ont été fournis, puis on va prendre la meilleure décision possible dans la situation.
Que pensez-vous de la sortie de Québec qui dit qu'ils ont un rôle à jouer sur la découvrabilité du contenu? Certains disaient, il me semble que c'est la juridiction d'Ottawa. Qu'est-ce que vous pensez?
Bien, premièrement, je vais réserver mes commentaires quand j'aurai une meilleure idée de ce que ça veut dire exactement pour Québec, là. Mais, tu sais, ma première réaction, c'est de dire que pendant toutes ces années-là, le CRTC, sur nos ondes radio, sur nos ondes télévisuelles, a réussi à protéger le contenu francophone, à donner une bonne visibilité à nos artistes et à nos créateurs. On vient de moderniser la loi pour faire la même chose avec les plateformes en ligne. Donc, je vois pas pourquoi le CRTC serait plus capable de faire ce travail-là aujourd'hui. Au contraire, on lui donne maintenant les moyens. Donc, nous, on va continuer d'avancer avec le travail sur la loi.
Donc, c'est un peu superflu, dans le fond, ce que le Québec veut faire.
Bien, je comprends qu'ils veulent protéger nos artistes, le contenu francophone au Québec, mais partout à travers le Canada. Puis, on partage cette volonté-là et c'est pour ça qu'on a modernisé la loi sur la radiodiffusion.
Est-ce que vous avez l'impression d'avoir perdu concernant les frais de scolarité au poste secondaire?
Je vais laisser les commentaires là-dessus.
Auriez-vous l'impression d'avoir un peu perdu votre temps si vous abandonnez ces 18, la formule de ces 18 et que vous créez, vous avez l'idée d'un fonds pour les médias là, que vous proposent certains médias?
Premièrement, j'ai jamais dit qu'on reculait sur ces 18. J'ai dit qu'on était à analyser les commentaires qu'on a reçus des plateformes, mais aussi des médias. Je pense que tout le monde a un intérêt à trouver la voie de passage pour que ça fonctionne. L'intérêt supérieur pour lequel on a agi avec cette loi-là, c'est pour que nos médias puissent continuer à faire leur travail, puis c'est là-dessus qu'on demeure concentré. Et donc, on va prendre les mesures nécessaires pour que ça fonctionne.
Mais il ne reste pas beaucoup de temps. Il ne reste pas beaucoup de temps.
For English-speaking bishops, for Concordia, for McGill being raised to 17 grand. 17 grand for someone in Ottawa to go to bishops, go to Concordia, go to McGill. A Parisian or a Belgian would pay 7. Is that not a problem?
Well, thanks for asking the question, by the way. I mean, I have had some conversations with colleagues in Quebec to say, you know, the issue we have in this country, what has made us successful for generations, is talent. You know, many of these generational investments we've been able to get in Canada have been, the first point of discussion has never been about what subsidies you're going to have, but will you have the talent to generate the growth for the next decade? So for me, the lens I use, and I'm a Quebecer, is how can we maintain that talent, that we nurture talent, we attract talent, and we make sure that in these new technologies, we're talking about AI, we're talking electric vehicle, we're talking battery, can we have that talent? So obviously, I am very mindful of the work that's being done in Quebec to, you know, support French language. Obviously, I'm a Quebecer. But on the other end, I think there is a reflection that needs to be done in terms of what signal it sends, you know, because when the further you go, these signals could be interpreted in different ways. And my focus, and as the industry minister, is always how do you make sure that you keep attracting that talent, that we don't send, in my view, a signal that would discourage talent to seek to come to some of the best universities we have in Canada, whether it's McGill, whether it's Concordia, whether it's the third one, which is Bishops, Bishops. So that is my reflection. Obviously, it's for Quebec to make that decision, but certainly that's on the back of my mind as to the message we're sending with that. Merci tout le monde.